Right, so this is the tier list that we cooked up last week. This is in terms of power, and we're going to progressively update this tier list every week going forward until Season 3 launches. We just had some massive changes, and I've got to do more testing this week, so we'll see how the specs fare, and we'll see if they've changed any of their positions. Spoiler, they have. Right, so starting with Boomy then. I don't think it's any secret. We've heard all the Boomies crying. Boomy's tier set has been pretty gutted, unfortunately. Now, I think it's still in a decent spot, so ignore the sandbagging and ignore everyone saying that Boomy is completely dead, because it's not. It still has great damage outside of that. It's now also still bringing great priority damage and also AoE damage from the tier set. It just has been nerfed by quite a bit. So for that reason, I am going to move Boomy down into the A+ tier. We're going to leave it at the bottom for now. We'll see if any specs take the bottom spot for A+. But Boomy, A+ is still an amazing spot to be in for Season 3, right? Boomy's dead! No! So next up, we've got the Frost Death Knight. Now, was it a week ago? This spec was buffed by a flat 10%. Don't know where that came from. I feel like Blizzard, did they do that off of the first week of raid testing? I'm not really sure. But that was not needed at all. It's now recently, last night, just been nerfed by 12% across the board. Definitely a warranted nerf. I didn't even realize. I knew the spec was broken. After playing with some Frost DKs that obviously knew their shit this week, I didn't realize how broken this spec was. And the gap here, like, it honestly, it almost needed like its own tier. It needed to be like an S+ tier, because the gap between these two was so large that even after these nerfs to Frost DK, I still think that Frost DK is top of the S tier, and probably, but maybe not, the best looking spec still going into Season 3. So we're going to keep the Frost DK firmly at the top of S tier for now, okay? So next to it, we're kind of just going to go through the list here and change them as we go, right? Okay, so Enhanced is up next. Enhanced had very minor nerfs. It's had nerfs to Tempest and its secondary target damage. So I'm just going to leave it where it is. I think Enhanced is still a very, very good spec. The gap was much larger before these recent DK nerfs, but now I think these two specs are firmly in the S tier. They're both very, very good specs. And next up, we have the Arcane Mage. Now, Arcane did get a flat 3% buff, but this was to compensate and offset for the big old nerfs that especially Spellslinger got for their tier set. You can't really reliably spend on Barrage like you used to. You used to get up to 20 stacks of Arcane Harmony and then be able to guarantee a Barrage basically your whole rotation as Arcane before, but this is definitely going to hurt its overall damage because it's not going to be able to spend on barrages like it used to. I'm going to drop the Arcane Mage down to the top of the A+ tier. Still a very good spot to be in, nonetheless. Okay, next up we got the Beastmastery Hunter, and much like Boomy, it's kind of had its tier set gutted. I mean, I didn't think the nerfs have been as bad for BM to its tier set. From what I've seen, Stampede is still doing like 15 to 20% of your overall, which is huge from a tier set. It's definitely hurt the spec, but I do still feel like it is pumping DPS. So I'm going to drop this down to the A+ tier as well. I'm going to slot this just in front of Boomy. I do think it's still outputting more damage than Boomy. And also, I do feel like I kind of underrated it last week. Like, it was disgusting last week. And I don't think I really realized how disgusting it was. Moving on then, we've got the Shadow Priest. So Shadow has had some pretty hefty nerfs to the tier set, which is definitely going to hurt their overall damage, going to hurt their Psychic Link damage specifically, and also their Prio and single target. They got some pretty sizable nerfs to Void Blast, as well as the buffed up Void Torrent from the tier set. So I think what this is basically going to do is bridge the gap between Void Weaver and Archon. I feel like Void Weaver might still slightly pull ahead, but this has definitely hurt their damage overall. I think it was kind of, I don't want to say a stretch, but I think it was generous to give Shadow S tier last week, maybe. But now it's definitely going to go down into the A+ tier, sorry. So we're going to drop it in just behind Arcane. Now we have the Havoc Demon Hunter, which did actually manage to dodge tuning this week, which is very nice for the spec. It's still looking to be very, very strong going into Season 3. Like I mentioned previously in the previous tier list, I do think that this spec could maybe be an S tier spec. I'm going to leave it where it is for now, but my god, this spec is pumping. It's doing all kinds of work on single target, AoE, prio damage. It's got it all. So solid A+, and it's probably going to stay at the top of A+. Right, Fire Mage. So I'm not actually super confident with where I'm going to be placing this. It's been all over the place recently with buffs and nerfs, specifically to Frostfire. Frostfire got buffed pretty heavily, and it's just constantly been nerfed since then. They have had some spec buffs to compensate, which is going to help with their already very, very strong single target. But I do think that Fire Mage is going to now end up playing Sun Fury and probably Flame Strike Sun Fury, which is going to hurt it in terms of not bringing prio damage anymore from the Ignite Fire Mage that it once was. But I think it's still going to be able to pump out overall DPS, and it's also bringing that single target DPS as well. So I'm going to keep Fire Mage in the A+ tier. I actually think I'm going to move it above Shadow Priest though, because I do think that Arcane and Fire were close before, and I think with the nerfs to Arcane, and if Fire goes Sun Fury, I think these are pretty interchangeable, and I want them to be next to each other. Okay, Demonology Warlock. Now, this has had some nerfs to the tier set, specifically for Soul Harvester, Diabolist, and we'll speak about this for Destro as well. Diabolist has been turbo juiced, so I would not be surprised if Diabolist became the play, but I think Soul Harvester is still going to be in a great spot. Like I mentioned last week, I think Demo is just going under the radar. I think this spec is pumping DPS, single target, AoE, cleave damage. It's always got damage as well. And I think that's also going to be helped by the Diabolist changes, because all of your commanders have just been turbo buffed. So for that reason, I'm very happy to keep Demo exactly where it is. A strong A+ contender. So Survival is next. This actually got no changes, but I do think I want to drop Survival down to the A tier. I think I overestimated it a bit. I think it's still a very good spec, and being in the A, especially at the top of A, is still a very, very good spot to be. But yeah, I don't know if Survival is on par with these other specs that are going to stay in the A+ tier. So all I want to do for Marksmanship Hunter is move this to the top of A. I think I heavily underplaced this in my last ranking. I didn't realize how insane Marksmanship Hunter was. It's probably somewhere in the S tier, to be honest. It did last night get a 10% nerf across the board, which is definitely no bueno. But I do think that Marksmanship is still pumping damage. I think it's better than Survival and has been better than Survival. But yeah, I'm going to lock this in at the top of A for now. So Elemental Shaman is next. I'm going to keep Ellie where it is. It didn't get any changes this tuning or this week around. It's still very cooldown reliant, but it still does incredible damage. So yeah, solid A tier for the Elemental Shaman. Let's move on to the Retribution Paladin then. So Ret received some large and in charge buffs last night, bringing its overall damage up across the board. But it's also looking like it's going to increase its single target damage, which is exactly what Ret needs. So it's looking a lot better now. This spec was already pumping the meters. It brings everything else. It just needs a bit more prio, a bit more single target. It's got a bit more single target this time around. So for the Retribution Paladin, I am going to place this bad boy in the A+ tier. Destro is next. Wow. Destro got insane buffs to Hellcaller, but like specifically Black and Soul, which was already your top damage in dungeons, and it just got a 20% flat buff. So this spec was already going under the radar, I think. For Season 3, this spec was kind of pumping, but that's because of the dungeon pool, sorry. You're always doing mass AoE pulls, which is something that Destro shines in regardless of if it's got cooldowns or not. Black and Soul just got turbo juiced, and also, like we were talking about earlier, Diabolist, I don't even know what they did to Diabolist. They just flat buffed bloody everything, and now this spec is going to be crazy. Yeah, you've got both tier sets, or both hero talents, and therefore tier sets looking very, very, very strong for Destro. I'm gonna put it next to Demo. I don't know which side I want to do. Honestly, I think I'm gonna go in front of Demo. Destro is now solidly placed in the A+ tier. This spec is looking disgusting with the recent buffs that it just got. Right, now we've got the Assassination Rogue. So this spec got flat damage buffs. Well, not flat damage buff, but it got buffs across the board for all of its individual abilities, except for Crimson Tempest. I feel like they're really trying to make this spec meta. They buffed it the previous week as well, didn't they? It was already pumping, so I'm just going to bump up the Assassination Rogue and put it in the A+ tier as well. As you can see, we've got a lot in A+. Like, I feel like class balance as a whole is looking real solid for Season 3. Onto the Subtlety Rogue. So Sub got some buffs to Black Powder. I'm not sure that will really change anything. They got a slight buff to Nimble Flurry as well. So welcome AoE buffs, but not enough, in my opinion, to move its position. So we're going to keep Sub at the bottom of A tier for now. Right, so now we have the Frost Mage. So Frost literally just got a 10% flat buff to its damage. Very good, very nice. Huge for this spec because it was already performing very well in all types of damage scenarios. And I do feel like I underrated this spec last week. It's got a very consistent damage profile regardless of the scenario. Single target, prio damage, mass AoE. It does it all. They did get some nerfs to both of their tier sets, but nothing too crazy, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to put Frost Mage in the top of A tier just behind Marksmanship Hunter. Again, much like the Frost Mage, I feel like I underrated Feral last week as well. I've got to test a bit more Feral on the PTR this week, and this spec is pumping. It brings great consistent damage. It also brings really nice single target as well, which I did not realize. Saber George just got a buff as well, so that might help a single target if you start playing that talent now and buffing up those ferocious bites even more. In terms of the single target damage, it does great priority damage in AoE as well and crazy high burst. So I am going to move this spec up as well and place this in the A tier. Okay, continuing with the theme of me undervaluing and underappreciating specs last week, we've got the Unholy Death Knight. Now, last night this got a lot of fixes to the bugs that it's had, which is going to help with its undeath damage, which is its tier set damage, and it also just got some bug fixes for the whole class and spec itself, which is definitely going to help the spec a tremendous amount. It was already pumping. It's still the king of AoE. We're seeing a lot of mass AoE in Season 3, so it's going to play into that perfectly. And the single target is actually better than I thought it was going to be as well from my testing this week. So I am going to also move the Unholy DK up to the A tier and slot that in just behind the Frost Mage. Okay, moving on to Outlaw. So Outlaw just got again hit with a 10% flat buff, which is really nice for the spec. It's going to be pumping now in the right hands, not in my hands. Yeah, Outlaw's looking good going into the next season. It's got a very consistent damage toolkit, which is always nice to bring. So I'm going to move up Outlaw to the A tier. I'm going to put it in front of Sub and slot it nicely in the bottom of A tier. Now we have the Arms Warrior. So Arms got a Bladestorm buff last night, so you probably take Bladestorm over Ravager now, but that's not going to change its placing in the slightest. Warrior still needs tremendous help. I'm going to keep Arms exactly where it is in the B tier, but we might see some specs overtake it. That being the Devastation Evoker. So I played with a few more devs recently, and they can actually output some great damage, both in terms of single target and also AoE. I'm still going to keep them in the B tier, but I am going to move them up. They did get a slight change to their Scale Commander tier set. I'm not actually sure if this is a buff or a nerf yet. I guess we'll have to see, but I don't think it's going to change its placing too much, and I think Dev is definitely top of B for now. Okay, it is a buff or it's a good change. Okay, nice. So the same applies to Org. That also got the change for Org Scale Commander tier set with the changes to the Pyre. It's doing more damage now, but I think you're able to drop less of them maybe, from what I gathered. Again, no changes in the recent tuning. Apart from that, I'm just going to keep Org pretty much where it is in the middle of the B tier. Right, so we have Affliction Warlock now. And again, I think I did underrate Affliction in the last placement. It was just after the single target buffs came in, which is something that AF needed. AF always struggles with single target, so those single target buffs were very welcome. And then since then, this spec has seen big buffs to both of the, well, both the tier sets, which is both hero talents, right? So they're just gaining damage across the board here. But yeah, AF is just looking a lot more solid now. So we're going to bump this up to the A tier. I'm going to put this in just behind Survival. Yeah, AF's doing a lot of damage, and it kind of lends itself to Season 3 as well, with a lot of its damage being baked into its mass AoE damage. I still don't think it has great single target, but I think the AoE can carry. Windwalker, I'm going to keep exactly where it is. Mystic Touch got nerfed back down to 5% instead of the 8% that it previously got buffed to. It's still hard cap. It's not doing amazingly right now, so bottom of B tier for the Windwalker. And then Fury Warrior, got insane buffs. Holy shit. Fury Warrior in S tier. Oh my god. Fury is meta. No. Fury got buffs to bolster its AoE damage, but they didn't uncap them. Point and laugh. I'm going to move them up to the B tier, the bottom of B tier, but nothing is really going to change that much for this spec. It's just going to do a bit more damage to 5 targets while everything else is doing damage to everything. So that is my tier list update number 2. Like I said, we're going to be updating this every week after the tuning and changes, but that's what it's looking like so far. Frost DK is definitely at the top of S tier. I think Enhanced maybe could be A+ tier, but I'm going to leave it in S for now. And then we've got Fury and Windwalker still at the bottom, unfortunately.